about the WolfTrack Classic, and I'm very excited to say that Eva Sebesta is here to teach us about the WolfTrack Classic. Eva is a transplant to the Ely area from southwestern Wisconsin. She first came to Ely on a vacation, talk about vacation to relocation, tourism as the first big trend, and then returned to Ely to attend BCC. And she met her husband, Dave, when she was working at Canadian Border Outfitters that first summer when she was at BCC. And from what I can tell, maybe essentially never left, or at least came back and then stayed for 35 years, which is amazing. She did go on to receive a master's degree in natural resource management, conducting research in soils, vegetation, and wetlands. But she's here today in her capacity as a volunteer for the WolfTrack Classic, but you may know her as the executive director of the Ely Chamber of Commerce. So please welcome Eva.
Thank you. And before I get started, I have to do a quick shout out to Les Conrad, who I saw was on the Zoom list. And Les has been a photographer for the WolfTrack Classic for a number of years, and a lot of the photos that you see in today's presentation are, we've always appreciated the fact he catches some great action photos and things like that. So first of all, thank you for letting me come in and talk about WolfTrack Classic. It's a passion of mine. I never got above recreational mushing in my younger years, but I love the race, love the opportunity to have something really exciting that captures really the essence of Ely. And this is where my technology skills fall apart.
It's not working for you? No. Usually it's just a matter of one simple click here.
Okay.
Let me double check for you.
This is not unusual. I have bad technology karma.
It's not your fault.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So some of the things that I'm going to talk about today are really looking at Ely's history, heritage, and culture. Talk a little bit about the sled dog racing in Ely. WolfTrack isn't the first sled dog race. How the WolfTrack got started, a little bit about our sponsorships and donations, and then some details on this year's race.
It's not working?
No, that's okay. I can pop it forward here. Okay, so if I can spend a couple of minutes kind of sharing from my perspective as a transplant up here. I've been here for over 35 years, and there is just something that I love about Ely. There's always a sunrise or a sunset, the night sky, the rippling of the northern lights, wildlife wandering through my backyard at Moose Lake. There's always something new and beautiful about this area. But the flip side to that is it can be a really rugged place to live, especially in the wintertime. It's not a real forgiving place in some circumstances. And for the early folks that came here, they had that adventuresome spirit, fiercely independent. They would travel by skis and snowshoes, and a lot of times they had sleds that they used with dogs to pull supplies, firewood, things like that. So that working dog was part of the culture here for a very long time. And when the race was kind of in its early moments, there were a number of different kennels that were up in the area. There was the Burnside Kennel, the Bearhead Kennel, Chet Sled Dogs, and those are just a few of the different kennels that were up here. But mushing was really a part of the lifestyle for this area. And one of the really cool things is J.P. Grahak, in one of his moments as mayor, actually proclaimed Ely as the sled dog capital of the U.S. And I think it really spoke to the number of mushers and kennels in the area. To talk about sled dog racing, we have to go back to the very first race, which was the All-Alaskan Sweepstakes that started in 1908. It ran until 1917. They did a commemorative 75th race in 1983 and then 100th anniversary in 2008. And that was a 408-mile race that went from Nome to Candle and then back to Nome. Then other sled dog races started to be developed across the country. Discussion about a sled dog race here in Ely started in 1969, and it was really a group of resort owners, a couple of different organizations in the Ely area. And one of the things that they wanted to do was figure out how they could capture winter tourism to the area. During the summer, resorts and outfitters, they were doing fantastic. Thousands of people were coming to Ely, and it was recognized as a wonderful destination in the summer. But in the winter, things just kind of quieted down. So because of the number of mushers and kennels and things like that, they really thought that focusing on a sled dog race would be a fantastic way to do an event that kind of looked at the culture and some of that heritage that was naturally part of Ely. The first race was held in January of 1970. It was the Minnesota Arrowhead Championship, and there were a number of teams that ran in that race. And part of the race, they teamed up with the North Star Sled Dog Group and had some expert mushers that came in and helped them get that race set up. Well, after the race was done, they talked about things and decided that really a more appropriate name would be the Ely All-American Sled Dog Race. So that race ran until the 1990s, and it was the largest race in the lower 48. Alaska's famous Iditarod race. There were a number of notable mushers that ran the race, nationally recognized individuals, Joe Reddington, Doc Lombard, let's see, Merv Hill Piper, George Adela. But then I also have to mention some of the local Ely mushers that ran in the race that some of you may recognize the names: Stu McIntyre, Vicky Condos, Stu and Michelle Ostoff. Those are just a few of the mushers that ran in that race. And it was a multiple day event. They had a beard contest. They had a twilight parade. The Kiwanis had a great big pancake breakfast, music events. It was really quite the draw, and thousands of people came to Ely to take advantage of that event.
Was there a prize money for the winners?
Oh, absolutely. The purse ranged anywhere. I think the first year was maybe $5,000, but it went as high as $15,000, which, if you think about, and that purse was back in the 80s, and you think about 89 cents a gallon gas and $15,000, that was a huge chunk of money for those mushers. So it was definitely worth mushers to participate in that race. So these are some of the images. Every year the race had a souvenir guide that they printed, and these are just a few of the images out of those. And one of the, I'll pause on this for just a second. Val and Don Valand, if any of you are familiar with them, they were actually the national spokespersons for Tuffy's Dog Food, which was a huge sponsor. We also had Ham's Beer that was a sponsor for a number of years. I'm not sure cracking a cold beer right at the end of a race, if that was something that all the mushers did, but they were a huge sponsor for a long time. So the race ended in the early 1990s, and it went about 12 to 14 years with no race. And obviously, a race the size that it was had a huge economic impact on the area. So there was really a hole or a vacuum that was created with the loss of that race. The mushers themselves were a little frustrated because they really felt that it helped to positively focus on that mushing culture in the sled dog racing. So in 2006, multiple mushers from the area got together, started talking about doing a race, and the first WolfTrack Classic was held in March of 2008. So the two main classes that were part of the original WolfTrack were the 6-dog race and the 8-dog race. And the 6-dog race ran from Ely to Tower, Minnesota and finished there. And then the 8-dog race ran to Bearhead Park and then back to Ely. At one point, they did add a longer distance race that actually went from Ely all the way up to Cook and back. And they only did it 1 year. And part of the reason that they discontinued it is they had to man or staff road crossings for basically a 48-hour period. And so they had multiple shifts of volunteers that had to be there because if you're familiar with sled dog racing and multiple day races, mushers have a mandatory period of time that they have to lay over, and they can pick where they do that at, but then they can hit the trail. So you may have mushers coming back towards Ely at 1 a.m. So you always have to have somebody at that road crossing for a safety reasons. So if you want to go ahead to the next one. So in 2018, Ellen Cashman, who is the race director, actually reached out to Brad Decker, who is part of the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. And she wanted to figure out a way to bring the Tower race back to Ely. So the 6 dogs would start in Ely and go back, because having 2 different finish lines, there were a lot more volunteers involved. And it was very frustrating for the mushers to have to come back to Ely. So Ellen and Brad figured out the route that you see in hot pink, and it basically follows to Taconite. And then when it gets down to the Purvis Lake area, it loops around and then heads back to Ely. The green highlighted area, the 8-dog teams travel along. They actually go down on the northern edge of Bearhead State Park, head down to the Fishing Lakes Loop, and then straight up across Bearhead Lake, and then back onto the Taconite. And if you're looking for a really cool point to watch the 8-dog teams, there's a warming house over in Bearhead State Park. You do have to have a day permit, but you see those teams coming across the lake, and it is just really something. Next slide. That's okay. So the WolfTrack Classic was originally formed as a 501c4, and they really had a strong educational component. They would go and work with kids at classrooms, take sled dogs to the Ely, and Babbitt schools, and allow the kids to interact with the dogs and have that experience. And it was managed by a board of directors. In 2019, after the race had run, there just weren't enough board members left to be able to keep the race going. So they reached out to the Ely Chamber of Commerce and asked if we would be willing to take over the event. And we had been involved with the original Ely AllAmerican. So we felt that it was just a really good fit for us. And so in October of 2019, we took over the race. We do have a WolfTrack board, and that consists of a race marshal, which is Stan Pazzanotti. And Stan is the guy that interprets all the race rules, makes decisions on any infractions, things like that. We also have a chief veterinarian, which is Dr. Chip Hansen, and Dr. Chip's been with the race since 2008, and he is an amazing person. The Ely Vet Clinic, really professional staff, and those dogs are under his care from the moment they hit the ballpark on Sunday morning until the awards dinner. And if dogs come off the trail and they're injured, he gives them free medical care. If they're dehydrated, he gives them hydration packs. I mean, and at no cost to the mushers. And so that's pretty amazing. We also have the race director, which is Ellen Cashman. She hasn't been the race director every year, but a number of years. And she's the person that is ripping her hair out in large clumps, behind the scenes, getting permits and all that kind of stuff. But she does a fantastic job and absolutely loves this race. And then the Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors, they basically kind of are the overarching governing board that looks after the race on a much higher level. So the WolfTrack board is basically the group that they're the operational side of things. So a large part of what drives our race and what continues it going is sponsorships. We have Premier and Purse sponsors, which those are our really large donors. And the last couple of years during COVID, businesses have been hit pretty hard. It's a really hard thing to do, is to donate $5,000 or $8,000. So we have come up with some other ways to do funding to be able to keep the race going. And the trail bosses, those are folks that are donating $1,000 or more. One of our really good sponsors is Midco, and they've been fantastic, working with us, and they also sponsor the 2 festivals. Lead dog sponsors are $500 or more, wheel dog $300 or more, and friends of the WolfTrack are any dollar amount. We did start doing mile markers 2 years ago, and those go out on the trail. It's a $100 donation, and it can be families, it can be dog kennels, it can be businesses or nonprofit organizations, and they get their name on a sign, a photo, a lot of times Les's photo on the sign, and then some type of an inspirational or cute saying like "Run Doggies Run," and we put those along the race course, sort of like the marathon does, with the cute signs to kind of motivate the runners out on the course. Last year, we had a limit with the state of Minnesota, and we could only have 200 people at the start finish, which meant that we had about 50 mushers and about 50 to 75 handlers, and then our volunteers, and then that maxed us out at the 200. So we weren't able to have spectators last year. So we started paper spectators, and we had some school kids use paper plates, draw some cute photo or pictures on them, and then we put them along the start chute, and the mushers loved it, and they asked us if we would keep doing that. So we actually do it for $10, and you can submit an image. We've got pictures of folks, family pets. We've got some of the artists that have done sketches. So the mushers see those images going out, and then when they come back, they see the names of the people that were cheering them on at the race start. We also did an online auction this year, and we'll be doing that again for the 2023 race. And then this fall, we're going to have a live music event with Van and the Free Candies here at the Grand Ely Lodge. So this year's race, we've got 13 8-dog teams. We've got 36 6-dog teams, which equates to 49 mushers, about 98 handlers. We've got 120 volunteers that are going to be either at the start finish or at the different road crossings and safety points. And the dogs are going to be 320, and it's going to be a howling good time. I guarantee it. Yes, ma'am.
And the 8-dog race is that 2, 2, 2, and 2.
Yep, they usually run them that way. Yep,
Absolutely. So, and if you are anywhere close to the softball field, you are going to hear the howling and the barking and the excitement starting at about 7 o'clock. So here's the different events that are going on. Saturday night, we have a all-you-can-eat spaghetti dinner, and that's put on by the BCC Wilderness Club, and that's at the BCC cafeteria. It starts at 4 and wraps up at 6 o'clock, and that's a fundraiser for the Wilderness Club. Adults are $10, youth and BCC students are $5. Race day is Sunday at 9 o'clock. We encourage folks to come a little bit earlier. The mushers are there at 7. They'll start pulling their dogs out of the truck at about 7 to 8 o'clock. And so 8 to 8:30 is a really good time to walk around and see the different teams before they get harnessed up and ready for the race. Usually about 8:45, we encourage everybody to go over to kind of the spectator area so that the teams can get harnessed up, hooked up to the sleds, and then we start moving the dogs at about 10 to 9, getting them into place and ready to go. Then Sunday night, we have our awards dinner right here in this room at the Grand Ely Lodge, and anybody is welcome to come to that. We wait until the last musher is off the race course and here at the Grand Ely Lodge before we do prizes. And this year we've got a little bit warmer weather, so I think the trails might be a little bit quicker. It usually starts somewhere between 4 and 5. Usually the mushers, as they come off, they'll feed their dogs, get them back into the dog boxes, and then they'll come here to grab a meal while they're waiting for the awards dinner. So it's a great time to meet the mushers as well. Okay. And then if this works, this should pop through a few different mushers. So we'll see if it works or not. So are there any questions? Yes, sir.
2 questions. When you mentioned a limit, you were using the paper spectators. What is that all about? The limit.
Oh, okay. So I'm sorry. So the state of Minnesota last year, because of the COVID restrictions that they had on outdoor events, we could only have that 200 people. Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't explain that very well.
The other question is, if you wanted to see the race on Bearhead, what's a good time to show up?
So our road crews usually show up about 9:15, 9:30, and within an hour, some of those fast 8-dog teams will start coming through. So we have road crossings at Bearhead, Cub Lake, the warming house. We don't have anyone there, but that's a really good place to watch the teams come off the lake. So those are some good points. Any other questions?
I'm asking the online crowd. See if anyone comes up with anything. What's your favorite part of being involved?
I think my favorite part of being involved is on Sunday morning when you see all the mushers come and you start to hear the dogs and the excitement. You know, I think with the dogs, you know, there's kind of a perception out there that the dogs are being forced to run. And one of the things that I can say is if there's anybody out there that loves to run, whether it's marathon or not, there is the endorphins and the high that you get from running, and you crave that and you love it. And the dogs are very much the same. They're working dogs and they just have a passion for doing this. Not all dogs do that. And I can say I've got a 75-pound husky at home that's didn't make the team. He tried, but he just didn't make the team. And I've got the world's best companions. So the ones that don't, they're rehomed to families. Yes, sir.
Is there prize money this year for those races?
Yep, there is. We've got $10,000, and that is going to be split between the two classes. And I believe we're paying down to 7th place in each class. But we are going to have, everybody is going to go home with a check. Anybody that doesn't place in the top 7 is going to get a $25 check. Toughies is now Nutrisource. And so Nutrisource is a sponsor. They have provided 40 bags of dog food. So those folks that aren't placing are going to get the $25 check, bag of dog food, which is $50. And then we also have 2 anoraks from Wintergreen Northern Wear. And so all of those folks will be put in a drawing, and one person from the 6 and one from the 8 will win one of those. So
We had an online question. Mr. Dayton asks if there are local mushers this year.
there are local mushers, and I'm going to try to think off the top of my head here. So Jennifer Frecking, you may know her from the Ely Vet Clinic. Her daughter, Elena, this is going to be her 2nd race this year. Yeah, she ran in the Minnesota Dog Derby earlier in the month, and Jennifer's going to be running the race with her. Trying to think if there are any other ones. There's from over on the North Shore, Errol Wallen is running, and he placed 4th in the Bear Grease Marathon a few weeks back. We've got Lena Morgan, who's also off of the Iron Range, and this is going to be her 3rd WolfTrack. The first year that she ran, she looked absolutely petrified, and now 3 years later, she pulls up to the line, and she's just got a lot of confidence.
Besides the Duluth race and this race, are there other races that you're competing against to get mushers?
Well, typically what happens is there's kind of slots that everybody fits into. And so when there's a new race that's formed, like the Minnetonka Dog Derby, they just did their 2nd year. And what people do is they look at the slots, and they try not to land on top of other races. And so we've been really fortunate. We've got kind of a unique slot. We're always that last weekend in February.
Could you take more mushers if they applied to race, or was it the ones that's how many you had applied to race here?
Okay, so our permit allows for a maximum of 60, and that can be 60 in any combination between the 2 classes. The first WolfTrack Classic, we did have the max 60 mushers. Typically, we're running somewhere around 40 to 50.
I'm curious if there are specific growth objectives that the organizers have identified for coming years.
Mm-hmm. I think as far as like the different activities, what we would really like to do is get into freight hauling, which is something that a lot of races used to have, and then it kind of went by the wayside. Paul Shirkey has Inuits, and they're really strong freight pulling kind of dogs. Malamutes are probably, and I've worked with them, so they're kind of the brutes. They're the big burly ones. And so they're freight pulling, and these mid-distance races are more for the sprint dogs. A lot of the dogs that you saw in the photos here are very streamlined. Siberian Huskies, some of them are bred with like Greyhound for the speed. So they're a much slender bodied dog for that racing, but there really isn't a lot of opportunity for some of those bigger, bulkier dogs to be able to run in races. So that's something that we'd like to do.
Has Peter McClellan ever run in this race or my wilderness?
Yep, he has. And his daughter Morgan has run in the race a couple of times. And So yeah, absolutely.
Do both races start at the same time?
So the 8-dog teams, because they've got a little bit longer route to do, they go out first. All the dogs go in 2-minute intervals. Then we have about a 5-minute break, and then the 6-dog teams start going out the trail.
When is mushing gonna be part of the Winter Olympics?
I don't know, you know, Don Beland actually tried to get that done, and I can smile with Don Beland. He passed this last year. And we had the opportunity to visit with him and Val before COVID started. And that was one of the things that he really talked about, is that it needed to be a winter Olympic sport.
What is the biggest logistical challenge of having 120 volunteers now that you've changed the routes to account for that challenge?
Mhm.
What's the hardest part?
So making sure that we have enough volunteers. We're really fortunate. The VCC law enforcement group, we've got 40 of those students that are covering multiple road crossings this year. Then we have a lot of just diehard, really good, they've helped every year volunteers. We have the VCC sled dog class that is helping do some of the handling. We also have Team Rubicon involved, and those are retired veterans, first responders, and then civilians. And if any of you know Mike Pope in the community, he and Janine Heidela are kind of the folks that are drawing people up. And I think for Team Rubicon, we've got somebody coming from Texas, multiple folks from Wisconsin. And so they draw on that larger group of Team Rubicon to come up and participate in that. And it gives them a wonderful experience.
We did have Tom Moore online, lets us know that the UP 200 race was in Marquette, Michigan this last weekend.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And if you're interested to see what different races are going on, we do have a Facebook page, WolfTrack Classic. And we also have a website, wolftrackclassic.com. But our Facebook page, we always do a shout out to the other races that are going, usually on that Thursday or Friday before the race. So if you're wondering what other ones are taking place.
Are these races, is this like a circuit where the same mushers go to all of them? Is it like points that go accumulate through the season?
Yep, there are mushers that will do circuits, and there are sled dog races all across the country. We actually have a musher that's coming from Washington State, and she's doing a circuit here in the Midwest. So they definitely will participate in multiple ones, kind of depending on which ones are running.
They do that type of circuit. Do they come off season to get familiar with the trails?
Some of them may. I'm not sure of that answer. What we do, we actually have right after the musher dinner, we have a musher meeting. And so we get up and we actually go over the trail with them. And Sully, Sue Ellen Sack, is our trail boss. And so she is out on the trail all day on Saturday signing it because we're running on a snowmobile trail. So we sign it to make sure that folks know that the race is happening. And so she will report on like the condition of the trail and go over some of the finer points. And then anyone that hasn't run in the race before, we have a meeting after the main musher meeting to go over the specific race course, just so that everybody's comfortable with it.
Do you know the origin of the term mush?
Oh, I don't. I'm going to defer to somebody that's like got that answer.
What this is probably apocryphal, but I in my reading. And one of the explanations that made sense to me was that it's a variation of the word marche from the French, and it got turned into mush. That sounded reasonable to me.
Yeah, thank you for contributing.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here today.